Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. The Fond du Lac School District announcing today they will use referendum funds to pilot an AI software in security cameras that will be placed at each secure entrance to the high school. In a first alert update, Drew Best brings us more details on the discussions between the district and the district attorney about school safety.
With a referendum vote just days away, the Fond du Lac School District partnered with District Attorney Eric Toney for a press conference. School district officials discussing the security upgrades they wish to pursue with money from the referendum, which incoming Superintendent Matt Steinbarth says is a key element to student safety.
I do believe that our schools are safe. However, much like I would for my own family, I believe in continuously improving and strengthening our safety measures whenever possible.
Toney says he had previously opposed the referendum before talking with the school board about implementing an AI safety software he learned about as part of the legislature's AI study committee.
One of the things we discussed in that committee was the use of AI technology and cameras that can be a threat detection for firearms, violence, things of that nature, that can give law enforcement and first responders a potential heads up to avert violence or arrive to a situation sooner.
The district says Toney brought them the idea to use the AI camera software just weeks ago, and the district agreed it could be beneficial.
I was amazed to see what can come out of this and keeping our community safer.
The school district will use $4.5 of the $40 million referendum to rework dozens of entrances to the high school. The vice president of the school board says this is the only school in the district that did not receive secure entrances during the last referendum. Steinbarth says none of the middle or elementary buildings will add the AI software unless the district feels the pilot is successful and cost efficient. People I spoke with after the announcement say they believe the AI software can help.
I think it's good fun to use as long as they meet it halfway. You know, that's the main thing, you know, as far as taxpayers and stuff like that. But enough where I think the funding is pretty substantial.
If they're working together, then it's got to be important. So I think it's definitely a priority.
The Fond du Lac community will officially vote on whether or not to pass the referendum on April 1st. Reporting in Fond du Lac, Drew Best, Action 2 News.